The Famous Five by Enid Blyton. Book 1. 5 on a Treasure Island. Chapter 16. A Plan and a Narrow Escape. Dick unbolted the door at the top and bottom and flung it open. He rushed in and thumped George and Julian happily on the back. "Hello," he said. "How does it feel to be rescued?" "Brilliant," cried Julian, and Tim barked madly round them. George grinned at Dick. "Good work," she said. "What happened?" Dick told them in a few words all that had happened. When he related how he had climbed down the old well, George and Julian could hardly believe their ears. Julian put his arm around his younger brother's shoulders. "You are a hero," he said. "A real hero. Now quick, what are we going to do?" "If they've left us our boat, I'm going to take us all back to the mainland as fast as possible," said George. "I'm not playing about with men who carry revolvers. Come on, let's go up the well and find the boat." They ran to the well shaft and squeezed through the small opening one by one. They climbed up the rope and soon found the iron ladder. Julian made them go up one by one in case the ladder wouldn't bear the weight of all three at once. Soon they were all up in the open air once more, giving Anne hugs and hearing her say with tears in her eyes how pleased she was to see them all again. "Come on," said George after a minute. "Off to the boat, quick! Those men may be back at any time." They rushed to the cove. There was their boat lying where they had pulled it, out of the reach of the waves. But then they had a terrible shock. "They have taken the oars," said George in dismay. "They know we can't row the boat away without oars. They were afraid you and Anne might row off, Dick. So instead of bothering to tow the boat behind them, they just grabbed the oars. Now we are stuck. We can't get away." It was a terrible blow. The children were almost ready to cry. After Dick's wonderful rescue of George and Julian, it had seemed as if everything was going right, and now suddenly things were going wrong again. "Let's think this through logically," said Julian, sitting down where he could see at once if any boat came in sight. "The men have gone off, probably to get a ship to take the ingots away. They won't be back for a while, I should think, because you can't charter a ship that fast unless, of course, they have got one of their own. And in the meantime, we can't get off the island to get help because they've got our oars," said George. "We can't even signal to any passing fishing boat because they won't be out at the moment. The tide's wrong. It seems as if all we can do is wait here patiently till the men come back and take my gold, and we can't stop them." "You know, I have a sort of plan coming into my head," said Julian slowly. "Wait a bit. Don't interrupt me. I'm thinking." The others waited in silence while Julian sat and frowned, thinking hard. Then he looked at the others with a smile. "I think it'll work," he said. "Listen. We'll wait here till the men come back. What will they do? They'll drag away those stones at the top of the dungeon entrance and go down the steps. They'll go to the storeroom where they left us, thinking we are still there, and they'll go into the room. But what if one of us is hidden down there, ready to bolt them into the room? Then we can either go off in their motorboat or our own boat if they bring back our oars and get help." Anne thought it was a wonderful idea, but Dick and George did not look so certain. "We'd have to go down and bolt that door again to make it seem as if we are still prisoners there," said George. "And what if the one who hides down there doesn't manage to bolt the men in? It might be hard to do that fast enough. Then they'll catch whoever we plan to leave down there and come up to look for the rest of us." "That's true," said Julian thoughtfully. "Well, say that Dick or whoever goes down doesn't manage to bolt them in and make them prisoners, and the men come up here again. All right, while they are down below, we'll pile big stones over the entrance, just as they did. Then they won't be able to get out." "What about Dick down below?" said Anne at once. "I could climb up the well again," said Dick eagerly. "I'll be the one to go down and hide. I'll do my best to bolt the men into the room, and if I have to escape, I'll climb up the well shaft again. The men don't know about that, so even if they are not prisoners in the dungeon room, they'll be prisoners underground." The children talked the plan over and decided that it was the best they could think of. Then George said she thought it would be a good thing to have a meal. They were all half-starved, and now that the worry and excitement of being rescued was over, they were feeling very hungry. They fetched some food from the little room and ate it in the cove, keeping a sharp lookout for the return of the men. After about 2 hours, they saw a big fishing boat appear in the distance and heard the chug, chug, chug of a motor boat too. "There they are," said Julian in excitement, and he jumped to his feet. "That's the boat they planned to load with the ingots and sail away in safety, and there's the motorboat bringing the men back. Quick, Dick, go down the well and hide until you hear them in the dungeons." Dick shot off. Julian turned to the others. "We'll have to hide," he said. "Now that the tide is out, we'll hide over there, behind those uncovered rocks. I don't think the men will do any hunting for Dick and Anne, but they might. Come on, quick!" They all hid themselves behind the rocks and heard the motorboat come chugging into the tiny harbour. They could hear men calling to one another. It sounded as if there were more than 2 men this time. Then the men left the inlet and went up the low cliff towards the ruined castle. Julian peered around the rocks to see what the men were doing. He felt certain they were pulling away the slabs of stone that had been piled on top of the entrance to stop Dick and Anne going down to rescue the others. "Come on," called Julian in a low tone. "I think the men have gone down the steps into the dungeons now. We have to try to put those big stones back. Quick!" George, Julian and Anne ran softly and swiftly to the old courtyard of the castle. They saw that the stones had been pulled away from the entrance to the dungeons. The men had disappeared. They had obviously gone down the steps. The 3 children did their best to drag the heavy stones across the entrance, but they were not as strong as the men. They couldn't manage to get any very big stones across. They put 3 smaller ones in place, and Julian hoped the men would find them too difficult to move from below. "I just hope Dick has managed to bolt them into that room," he said to the others. "Come on back to the well now. Dick will have to come up there because he won't be able to get out of the entrance." They all went to the well. Dick had removed the old wooden cover and it was lying on the ground. The children leaned over the hole of the well and waited anxiously. What was Dick doing? They could hear nothing from the well and they longed to know what was happening. There was plenty happening down below. The 2 men and another had gone down into the dungeons, expecting of course to find Julian, George and the dog still locked up in the storeroom with the ingots. They passed the well shaft, not guessing that a boy was hidden there, ready to slip out of the opening as soon as they had passed. Dick heard them pass. He slipped out of the well opening and followed behind quietly, his feet making no sound. He could see the beams made by the men's powerful torches, and with his heart thumping loudly he crept along the smelly old passages between the great caves until the men turned into the wide passage where the store cave lay. "Here it is," Dick heard one of the men say as he flashed his torch onto the great door. "The gold's in there. So are the kids." The men unbolted the door at top and bottom. Dick was glad that he had slipped along to bolt the door, for if he hadn't done that before the men had come, they would have known that Julian and George had escaped and would have been on their guard. The man opened the door and stepped inside. The second man followed him. Dick crept as close as he dared, waiting for the third man to go in too. Then he meant to slam the door and bolt it. The first man swung his torch round and gave a loud exclamation. "The children are gone! Where are they?" 2 of the men were now in the cave, and the third stepped in at that moment. Dick darted forward and slammed the door. It made a crash that went echoing round and round the caves and passages. Dick fumbled with the bolts, his hand trembling. They were stiff and rusty. The boy found it hard to shoot them home into their sockets, and meanwhile the men were not standing still. As soon as they heard the door slam, they spun round. The third man put his shoulder to the door at once and heaved hard. Dick had just got one of the bolts almost into its socket. Then all 3 men forced their strength against the door and the bolt gave way. Dick stared in horror. The door was opening. He turned and fled down the dark passage. The men flashed their torches and saw him. They went after the boy at top speed. Dick fled to the well shaft. Luckily, the opening was on the opposite side, and he could clamber into it without being seen in the light of the torches. The boy only just had time to squeeze through into the shaft before the 3 men came running by. Not one of them guessed that the runaway was squeezed into the well shaft they passed. They didn't even know that there was a well there. Trembling from head to foot, Dick began to climb the rope he had left dangling from the rungs of the iron ladder. He undid it as soon as he reached the ladder itself, because he thought that the men might discover the old well and try to climb up later. They would not be able to do that if there was no rope dangling down. The boy climbed up the ladder quickly and squeezed round the stone slab near the top. The other children were there waiting for him. They knew at once by the look on Dick's face that he had failed in what he had tried to do. They pulled him out quickly. "It was no good," said Dick, panting with his climb. "I couldn't do it. They burst the door open just as I was bolting it and chased me. I got into the shaft just in time." "They're trying to get out of the entrance now," cried Anne suddenly. "Quick, what shall we do? They'll catch us all." "To the boat!" shouted Julian, grabbing Anne's hand to help her along. "Come on, it's our only chance. The men might be able to move those stones." The 4 children fled down the courtyard. George darted into that little stone room as they passed it and grabbed an axe. Dick wondered why she bothered to do that. Tim dashed along with them, barking madly. They came to the cove. Their own boat lay there without oars. The motor boat was there too. George jumped into it and gave a yell of delight. "Here are our oars," she shouted. "Take them, Julian. I've got a job to do here. Get the boat down to the water, quick." Julian and Dick took the oars. Then they dragged their boat down to the water, wondering what George was doing. All kinds of crashing sounds were coming from the motor boat. "George! George! Hurry up! The men are out!" suddenly yelled Julian. He had seen the 3 men running to the cliff that led down to the cove. George leapt out of the motor boat and joined the others. They pushed their boat out onto the water, and George took the oars at once, pulling for all she was worth. The 3 men ran to the motor boat. Then they stopped in shock. George had completely ruined it. She had chopped wildly with her axe at all the machinery she could see, and now the boat could not possibly be started. It was damaged beyond any repair the men could make with the few tools they had. "You horrible little girl," yelled Jake, shaking his fist at George. "Wait till I get you." "I'll wait," shouted back George, her blue eyes shining dangerously. "And you can wait too. You won't be able to leave my island now."